My name is Clara Whitford, and the story I am about to share is not a simple one. It is the story of a young woman who lost herself, a man whose heart was broken, and a love that disappeared, wandered, and somehow found its way home again after 15 long years. It is a story filled with quiet mistakes, soft regrets, and slow forgiveness. It is the truth of my life, spoken gently, with all the tenderness and sorrow it deserves. I was 23 when I married James. At that age, I believed I understood love. I believed it was something bright and certain, like sunlight falling through a window. Our wedding took place in my mother's old garden, where roses grew in pale shades of cream and blush. I wore a simple dress with lace around the sleeves, and James held my hands as if they were delicate treasures he never wished to lose. He was steady, patient, and kind. So kind it almost frightened me. I often wondered why someone like him chose someone like me, a girl who still felt unsure of her own heart. Our first year together was quiet, gentle, and filled with small routines. James worked long hours, but always came home with that warm, familiar smile. I cooked dinners, and we spent slow evenings reading or walking through town hand in hand. But even in the midst of that peaceful life, something in me felt unsettled. I had grown up in a family where emotions ran wild and unpredictable. My mother cried often. My father shouted more than he should have. I learned to keep my feelings hidden, tucked away in a place even I had trouble reaching. James, with his calm nature, never understood the storms that sometimes swirled inside me. I loved him truly, but I often felt like a guest in my own marriage, someone who did not quite belong in the safe, steady world he offered. I longed for something I could not name, something that made me feel seen in a deeper, more urgent way. And that is when Henry Mallon, James's closest friend, became part of my life. Henry had known James since childhood. They grew up together near the sea, running barefoot along the sand and sharing secrets boys rarely confessed to anyone but each other. When Henry visited us, he filled the room with warmth and laughter. He carried a kind of restless energy, the opposite of James's quiet stillness. He was handsome in a different way, careless hair, bright eyes, an easy smile that made people feel important. At first, I admired him only as my husband's friend, but admiration is a dangerous seed, and under certain conditions, it grows into something else. It began with conversations. Henry had a way of listening that made me speak truths I never shared with James. He noticed small things, my silences, my worries, the way I hesitated before answering. He asked questions that touched the parts of me I kept hidden. One evening, after a long dinner, he said softly, "You don't laugh much, Clara. Not the way someone your age should. What weighs on you?" No one had ever asked me that before. I should have stepped away. I should have told him to give me space. But instead, I let myself be drawn toward the warmth of someone who seemed to understand the hidden corners of my heart. Days turned into weeks, and our conversations grew deeper, our glances longer. There were moments, small, fragile moments, when the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. A passing touch at the kitchen counter, a shared smile that lingered longer than it should have, a silence that trembled with meaning. I fought my feelings, but my resolve was weak and trembling. I was young, confused, and foolish enough to believe that I could manage a secret of the heart without breaking anything. I was wrong. One quiet evening in early autumn, everything changed. James had been called away for a work emergency, and Henry stayed behind after helping us with a few repairs around the house. The sun was setting in a wash of orange and gold. We stood on the back porch as the first cool breeze of the season brushed the trees. "You seem lonely," Henry said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." "I'm not lonely," I whispered, though even I knew it was untrue. He stepped closer, his expression gentle and troubled. "Clara, you don't have to pretend with me." That was the moment everything shattered. All the fear, longing, confusion, and emptiness inside me surged forward, begging for comfort. When he touched my hand, I did not pull away. When he leaned in, I let myself fall into the warmth of a feeling I had never allowed myself to explore. It was a single mistake, but a mistake large enough to break a life in half. The days that followed were filled with guilt. I woke beside James each morning and felt the weight of my betrayal settle on my chest like a stone. Henry avoided the house. He sent James a brief message claiming he needed space. Only I knew the real reason. I confessed 1 week later. James asked what was troubling me. He sensed it as surely as he sensed changes in the weather. I told him everything, my feelings, my mistake, my confusion. I cried until my throat hurt. James listened without interrupting, his face pale and still. When I finished, he stood up slowly, as if his body could not bear the truth it now carried. "I loved you," he said in a voice quiet enough to break the heart of anyone who hears it. "I still love you, but I do not know what to do with this pain." We separated 3 days later. Henry left town, and I began a lonely chapter of my life that lasted 15 years. Those years were filled with many things: jobs, small apartments, friendships that came and went, quiet birthdays spent alone, and long walks through empty parks. I tried to build a new life, but everything felt dimmer than before. I dated, but none of the men I met touched my heart. I often wondered if part of me had remained with James, lingering in the life I had thrown away. Time softens many things, but it never completely erased my regret. I grew older, wiser, calmer. I learned to understand the younger version of myself, not to excuse her, but to forgive her. Then, one chilly autumn afternoon, I saw him again. I was in a riverfront bookshop, reaching for a novel on the highest shelf. Another hand reached for the same book, and when I turned, there he was, James. Older, yes, more reserved perhaps, but still the same man whose steady presence once held my whole world together. "Clara," he said gently. Just my name, but it was enough. We spoke like old acquaintances at first, but as the weeks passed, we began meeting regularly. Tea on Saturdays, walks on Sundays, accidental dinners that grew into long conversations. We talked about our separate lives, our mistakes, our quiet joys. We did not rush. We did not pretend nothing had happened. We simply allowed ourselves to exist together again, slowly, delicately, like 2 pages returning to the same chapter. One evening, he confessed, "I never stopped wishing you happiness, even when we were apart." "I never stopped loving you," I whispered, though it felt frightening to say. He looked at me with soft, thoughtful eyes. I think we were too young then, too unsure. But now, perhaps we can love each other with the gentleness we didn't know how to give before. We did not promise anything that night. We only held hands and let the future approach at its own pace. But 1 year later, on a spring morning heavy with sunlight, James asked me to marry him again. This time, not out of youthful hope, but out of quiet, mature understanding. We married in a simple ceremony beside the river. No roses, no grand gestures, no trembling vows. Just 2 people who had drifted apart, lived separate lives, grown in different ways, and finally returned to each other with hearts wiser and more open than before. Our love now is calm and steady, like a candle that has burned through storms and still gives off a warm, unwavering light. I often watch James reading in the late afternoon sun, and I feel a deep gratitude that life, despite all the wrong turns, led me back to him. This is my story, a story of mistakes made in youth, of hearts that healed slowly, and of a love that survived long years of silence. It is not perfect, but it is true, and it reminds me every day that even after drifting far apart, 2 souls can still find one another again when the world is quiet and time is kind.